All right, everybody, welcome to the Ames Public Library virtually for Genealogy Plus, a program brought to you through a partnership with Ames Public Library and the Story County Genealogical Society. I'm Megan Klein-Hewitt. I'm the Adult Services Manager here at Ames Public Library. And we are delighted to welcome today's presenters, Kathy Jones and Pete Peterson, who will be presenting ancestry and DNA testing. We will be muting your phones during do that right now during this presentation. So please go ahead and submit any questions you have via the chat function, which you should find a link to at the bottom of your screen. I will be monitoring that chat to make sure that questions get shared with our speakers at the appropriate time. And we will also reserve some time for questions at the end of the session. Today's session is being recorded and it will be posted to the Ames Public Library's YouTube channel, as well as a link back to the SCGS page. If you get bumped out of today's meeting, just go ahead and follow that original link back to get to us and I'll let you right back in. And I will also drop the Genealogy Plus page of the Ames Public Library's website into the chat, and that contains a link to today's handouts. So you should be able to find that on the right side of the screen, the handout for this presentation. So with that, I will pass the microphone on to our speakers.
Okay, I'm starting today. I'm Kathy Jones. I am a retired university registrar from Iowa State, which indicates why I'm so interested in records. So I'm going to be talking about using DNA testing specifically through Ancestry.com, although I'll mention some of the other services as well. And there we go. Matters where I click on the Mac, I guess. So our topic today is genetic genealogy, and I'll go through the kinds of things I'll be talking about, and Pete will have a different focus somewhat. I'll be talking about genealogy research, not genetics. I was not trained as a geneticist. I am not a geneticist. And so my perspective is not an academic one. It is as a user and as someone who has done a lot of family research with a focus on DNA. Genetic genealogy actually began as a tool for historical research, and some of the interesting uses of it in the beginning were the Romanov family and how to verify their lineage, which is of interest to me because my family is German Russian, so they lived for 200 years in Russia, although they didn't have Russian connections, genealogically speaking. Genetic genealogy was also used to verify the connection between Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings via one of her, I think it was a grandchild. And then family use of genealogy and DNA began in the late 1900s, so it's fairly recent. Ancestry Dna is the service that I have used, and it's one of many that are now offering DNA testing options. And they each have their own niche. So you need to think about what it is you want. If your interest is medical, you probably don't want to choose Ancestry Dna. I chose it because that's where all my family data is. So it was an easy way to connect what I learned from DNA to my family tree. Genealogical family tree versus genetic family tree. I'll explain a bit about what the differences are. The types of DNA testing, we'll talk about genetic exceptionalism and strength of match, which is centimorgans. So uses of DNA testing. DNA testing is used to confirm or correct family tree information. It is not used to just give you a family tree. That won't happen. Through it, you can find new relatives and you can add to your knowledge about your extended family. And you may get a lot of matches like I do. I happen to be German Russian, which is maybe a term that most of you haven't heard of, but it's a group that lived in the Volga region of Russia. They had to leave Russia, and many of them came to the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So we have a fairly large community of German Russians in the United States, and they are interested in genealogy. So I have found a lot of relatives this way. You can also use DNA testing for family searching, where the parent is not known or someone wants to find out what family to which they belong. You can learn about your geographic origins and residences over time, and then combine this information with other types of information to reach a defensible conclusion. And it's always interesting when I find that I have a match with someone and I look and it says they're a second cousin once removed. And I look at my family tree and it says they're a second cousin once removed. And then I can look at the lineage and the people involved, and those also match. So it's definitely a way to confirm what you think you know. There are health-related genetic testing options. I haven't used those. I won't be talking about that specifically. And then DNA testing can also be used to isolate those with common traits. Ancestry does some of this. It may be, how do you have a cleft chin, of all things? And what is the predominance of that trait within people coming from different regions of the world? And so they do testing on that kind of thing. They ask questions and you can either choose to participate or not. And as I said, DNA testing will not provide a family tree. It gives you two basic kinds of information: your ethnicity prediction, what part of the world did your ancestors come from, and then a list of your DNA matches. And it will help you find possibly others who know more about your family history than you do. For example, if your great-grandmother's name is not found through DNA testing, you may find a cousin in your family who does know the name of your great-grandmother. And if you can identify that cousin and verify that through DNA testing, then you can share information with that other person and expand what you know about your family. And it's the combination of the DNA match and your tree plus your cousin's tree that helps you identify that common family line. So family trees before DNA, I'm not sure. I'm thinking you probably also have the right side of this cut off, and I haven't figured out how to undo that on a Mac. But at any rate, this is a typical genealogical family tree and what we have worked with over time. And you or me is that center circle right in the middle. And from there it goes to two people, two spots, one for mother, one for father, and then four for grandparents, etc. And you'll notice that all of those are white in this case, which means they could be filled in, but you may not know who all those people are. But at least if you can identify them, there are spots for all of your ancestors, and regardless of your DNA. Your DNA family tree, on the other hand, your genetic family tree, is not the same, because in each generation, the parents each contribute roughly 50% of the DNA to the child. So over time, the DNA influence of a specific person may be lost. And you'll notice on this one, the green shows the areas where there is a DNA connection. But as you work out, here, this is me in the middle. If I go out to, that would be like double great grandparents, maybe. There may be a double great grandparent that I have no connection to on the DNA side, but there's still a genealogical connection. So it is different. And what this means is you won't be able to identify every connection to your ancestors through DNA, because some of them you have no DNA connection to. And the match likelihood decreases with every generation. And once you get to a spot where you've lost a DNA connection from a specific person, then you would not be able to find their prior generation connections either. And the other thing to keep in mind is you and your siblings may all test, but you may find you have different DNA ancestors, because when their parents contributed their DNA to you, they may have given you a different 50% than another member of your family. So there's 4 types of DNA testing. And again, I am not an expert on DNA testing, but this is what I've learned from my research. The mitochondrial DNA is what comes to the child through the mother, and it is the only type of DNA not found in the cell's nucleus. It goes from mother to child. So it gives you information about the umbilical line. And when you look into a DNA service, they will tell you what type of DNA testing they're using. Autosomal DNA is it's related to the 22 pairs of non-sex chromosomes that are found in the cell nucleus, one from dad, one from mom, and you get about 50% of your autosomal DNA from each parent, 25% from each grandparent, and so forth. So it decreases with each generation. There's the sex chromosomes, and there's a chromosome pair in each cell nucleus. And within that, the Y chromosomes, of course, are the male DNA and passed from father to son. So you can do a study of paternal lines only using Y-DNA if there's a service that you find that does that. Now on the X chromosome side, since women have 2 X chromosomes, men have 1 X chromosome, that will reveal information about maternal lines for both men and women, although the paternal lines are only coming from one side. So my DNA journey, I first submitted an Ancestry DNA test sample about 3 years ago, and I was interested in finding unknown cousins in the US or other countries, and I have lots, which we all do. There were other family members who tested later, my mother-in-law and husband, my grandson, and I had one cousin's daughter, I believe, who tested. And that becomes relevant later. And I happen to manage the accounts for my mother-in-law and husband. So if there's something going on with new matches for them or messages, then those come to me because they don't actually go in and look at that information. So I did submit my DNA results, which is a file, to GEDmatch, which is a service that you can look into. It allows for matches to other DNA services. So if you've used Ancestry and someone else used 123andMe and you both submit to GEDmatch, then your match would come through on GEDmatch. So it also gives some different ethnicity estimates than you would get through Ancestry. So I got some unexpected results. I expected to be 50% Germanic, and it was 10%, according to Ancestry.com, and 25% Swedish, but only 12% there, 25% Norwegian, which is 46% for me. And I didn't expect any England or Northwestern Europe specifically, and that was 24%. So these are not unusual results because there's the way that the DNA is passed down, you only get a certain amount from each generation. So over time, you may skew towards one side or another in terms of your ancestry, and it's random. So this isn't unexpected, and it does change over time. So every time Ancestry.com does a reload, I will see a new set of percentages for my ancestral heritage. So that's an unusual thing, but it's just something that happens. So my unexpected occurrences, first of all, is what's a German Russian. I find a lot of cousins who are interested in their ancestry, but they haven't quite figured out that we are a very unique group of people who took a trail from Germany to Russia in the 1700s and then came to the United States, or not, in late 1900s and early 2000s, late 1800s and early 1900s mostly. I've helped a lot of others with their family searches. There's been some adoption cases, which I try not to get into too deeply, but sometimes I've been able to help. Sometimes they have a family connection, and I had one person who knew that she came from a specific family in a specific location. She wanted help with her specific parent, which I couldn't give her. But at least I was able to share some information with her that might have helped her some. And then there's been the things like, who is this close match? In my case, there was a cousin of my husband's who couldn't quite figure out who this really close relative was, and was also a relative of my husband's. Well, it turned out it was an unknown son of that person's brother. So it's that type of thing that will come up, and you need to think about how you're going to handle those things if they do in fact come up. I had one DNA match that was just apparently descended from both my mother's and my father's family. Although in my case, that's highly unlikely, given the paths that my father's family in particular took. So it's possible, but I haven't verified that specific connection. And it's similar to your genealogical research discoveries. I found some cousins through my genealogical research that I didn't know about. And it's the same kind of thing. I have to decide when to tell my other cousins and when not. And for the most part, I don't tell. I don't bring up things that happened 100 years ago. So genetic exceptionalism is a concept that you might want to be aware of. It's actually a belief that genetic information is unique and that privacy should be different for that type of information than other types of genealogical data. It's not universally an accepted view, but health information is one case where it's probably the best way to look at it. It is different than other information because you don't want to be in a position of sharing somebody else's health trends or likelihood of certain things. So from a genealogist perspective, it's the same information, whether it comes from DNA or birth death records or whatever. But you do need to be cautious about how you deal with your discoveries from DNA testing. I also can't see what that says. I need to find where I am. So DNA, this is, when I go into Ancestry and look at my DNA story, this is what comes up. And there's different links. I can go to to my story. I can go to the specific DNA matches. I have 29 starred matches, which means I found them really interesting, and 558 fourth cousins or closer. And I'm sure that my total number is well over that. It's well over 1,000 for total matches. Let's see. There's Ancestry Dna Traits is what I was talking about, like freckles, it mentions here. So you can indicate what your traits are and then see if there is a genealogical connection to others who have the same trait. So cilantro aversion, who would have thought? But that is something that you can actually do a check for within Ancestry. You can report your situation through Ancestry DNA Traits, and it will tell you how common that is for people with your heritage. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. I participated in some of those, but not all. There are settings in Ancestry DNA, information that you need to verify and decide what you want to have there. If possible, you'll want to link a family tree. You can make it private, which means it's usable within Ancestry, but people can't go in and look at all your information. Mine was public for a long time until I realized in doing additional research that I had some significant errors. And so I decided to make it private and then deal with specific people if they needed information to make sure I could check it and not give them anything that was dubious. And you can decide who can see your matches, ethnicity estimate, etc. You can consent to research. You can set who can send you emails, because there are, through Ancestry, you may get contacted about your tree or your DNA and your matches. So that's another thing. Now here's my ethnicity estimate, and I'm guessing you also can't see the percentages, but this is where I've got 46% Norway, 24% England and Northwestern Europe, etc. And where I circled down there, there's 2 possible ancestor stories found. That's a relatively new addition as far as I can tell. And it uses information in your tree to determine if there are things that they might be able to tell you that you might not have known about your ancestors. So when I went in, there were stories about my, let's see, a second great grandmother on my mother's side, Anna Lovisa Bengtsdotter. And that's a Swedish family. And so there's a story on her marriage in Sweden. I didn't find it particularly informative. It wasn't really a lot of information I didn't already know, but it's still interesting to read those stories if you have some that are offered to you by Ancestry. I have some that are offered both on my mom's side and my dad's side. So a DNA match strength is a centimorgan. And a centimorgan is a unit of genetic measurement, and it's what experts use to describe how much DNA and the length of the specific segments of DNA you share with your relatives. So the higher the number, the stronger the connection between two people. And the number itself, your number of centimorgans, connection to someone else, does give some indication as to how closely you are related, whether you are first cousins, second cousins. And so there's ranges of centimorgans that Ancestry uses to say this is your likely connection as far as how close a cousin you might be or other relative. So this is just a quick look at some of my matches. I'm a Frank by birth. And so Christian Jones is a grandson. Notice he has no trees, which is fine. But we have 1,832 centimorgans shared across 28 segments. So that's a very, very high number, and would explain why, because he's my grandson. Mike Frank is a cousin, and he's 1,554 centimorgans, excuse me, across 48 segments. Again, he doesn't have any trees, so there's not a whole lot more information that they can offer. Jeanette Frank is another first cousin, also doesn't have a tree. You'll notice I've got some pinks and blues and stars, and I assign groups to people according to whether they're on my mom's side or my dad's side. And the pink ones are mom, the blue ones are dad, and the stars are just people that I wanted to be able to check back on occasionally. Sapphire 213 is actually a cousin's daughter. And I included her in this display because she is one where it says we have a common ancestor, and it can say that because she has a tree. So there is some way to track not only her DNA and knowing that we have 548 shared centimorgans, but also we both have trees. And using that, we can figure out what our connection is. So there are quite a few search options for your DNA matches. You can look at your unviewed matches, common ancestors, which I find very interesting because it will show you in many cases a tree to look at. Individuals that you've corresponded with, and there's a few of those, and I try to keep up with those people if I can. And it will tell you whether their tree is public or private, and is there even a tree. Shared DNA, the centimorgan range, and then is each person assigned to groups. So if you only want to look at people on your mother's side and you use groups like I do and code them as pink, then you can look at your mother's side just by selecting that group. You can also do a search on name or birth location. So if I wanted to look with everyone who has the name Baskell somewhere in their tree, I can do that. And that will help me to find my great aunt's relatives in some cases. Okay, so this is a common ancestor search. A couple screens ago, I mentioned that Sapphire 12213 and I are linked, and it's a paternal link. And we do have common ancestors. Jacob, James, Frank, Katerina, Lauer are my grandparents. And she, of course, has the same link, although for her it's great grandparents. So on the right side of this screen, you can see her tree, and those that are highlighted in green with the leaves on them are our connections. And that makes sense. And so when it's this close a relative, I knew all this. But when you find someone that might be a fourth or fifth cousin, and you can see this kind of information, you can start to fill in some holes. So that's a really useful thing. As I mentioned before, you can use groups to categorize your matches, and you can watch for new matches, people that you haven't looked at before. And what I tend to do is if there's a new match, I look at shared matches that I have with that person. And generally they will come up as all pink or all blue. And that helps me to figure out whether that new match is likely a maternal or a paternal side match. So that's helpful. Now, through lines for me has been, sorry, I need to watch my time, has probably been the most useful part of all of this. And it wasn't here when I originally started using Ancestry DNA, but I've been using it more lately. And you can put, just as a comment, you can put photos into the profiles for your ancestors if you have them. So for those born late 1800s and later, I have photos. I have a few more that I could put out here, but at any rate, it makes it a little bit easier when you look because you can see right away who it is you're talking about. So Franz Frank is my great grandfather. There's 7 DNA matches, and Barbara Margaretha Leckman was his wife. So you'll notice with each that the blues are the males, the Leckmans are the females, and that's Ancestry's color coding. That's not mine. So the 7 DNA matches are all people that I would be fairly closely matched to. So that's something that would be of interest. And here those are. And each time I look at this over the last few months, originally it was just my own line, which is the Jacob James Frank line, which is my grandfather. And I think one other Uncle Clemens probably had some DNA matches. but I didn't have any on either Franz Frank or Barbara Frank. And there's another one off to the side, I believe, because there's 5 of them that came to the United States. And I now have DNA matches with all of them, in at least one person in each of those lines, which is interesting. And so I could click on, and I can't now because this isn't live, but I could click on the 3 DNA matches and look at those and then see if I know that person, or if not, how would I connect to them? So that's been a really interesting feature. If you go further down, and this Matthias Frank is a 5th great grandfather, which I didn't know. In my grandparents' village in Russia, there were 2 Franks that were original settlers. There was Matthias Frank and Heinrich Frank, and I'm descended from Heinrich Frank. And in that village, you're pretty much related to everyone, and we all know that because it wasn't that large a group, and over time there had to be intermarriages. So I did not know that I was also a descendant of Matthias Frank, but it turns out I am through his daughter, Anna Maria Frank. So I'm descended from both of the original settlers of that village. So I didn't know that my Lauers came through the Frank line as well, which they do. So this was a really interesting find, and I would not have found this connection without DNA. And then I go into the actual trees and the data that backs up those trees and can verify that, yep, this looks like it's correct. In the through line, there's color coding. There's pink and blue for male and female, as I mentioned. Green indicates a potential ancestor. And those photos that I showed earlier, or photo boxes, they list them in order of grandparent generation. So there's a spot for each of your grandparents in the various generations. Now I showing this particular example because I don't know who Fidel Knupfer is, but they are saying that he may be my 3rd great grandfather. And there is a note that that needs to be evaluated. Well, I evaluated it and I don't believe it at all. Maria Anaheim is definitely my 2nd great grandmother. I know that from many sources, but I have no faith in the fact that he was her father. There was one resource on that and it looked really iffy to me. So I will not accept that particular suggestion. And it did say evaluate, which you can't see there, but at any rate, I won't accept that suggestion. So suggestions for using Ancestry, if at all possible, link your DNA data to at least a private tree that includes your direct ancestors. You don't have to have all the aunts and uncles and cousins and all of that, but at least your direct ancestors, because if you don't do that, Ancestry can never find the kind of connections that they'll give to you either in through lines or in those common ancestor notes. Consider using groups to sort your matches by family category, which is something I mentioned. It's important to have and use a DNA reference source, either a book or on the web, and I'll give you a couple as I finish. Help others if you can. People are really, if they're going to the lengths of doing their DNA, they really want help. So it's best if you can help other researchers. And avoid sharing information that may cause embarrassment. And believe me, I found some things like that. So at any rate, it's, yeah, lots of different things that I won't ever mention to anyone, and that's just fine. And then the through lines is probably the most useful feature in the whole thing. But again, it won't work if you don't have some type of tree within Ancestry. So the references that I would suggest, First of all, the Family Tree Guide to DNA Testing and Genetic Genealogy, Blaine T. Bettinger, 2016. The Ames Public Library does have a copy of that, and so you'd have to check and see if it's currently checked out. I have a copy, so I just got the paperback version, and I also have it on my Kindle. So if for some reason I can't find my book, I can always go into my Kindle. And you can develop a basic understanding of DNA without being a geneticist or a biologist. I am neither, and I think I know a little bit more than when I started. And then the last resource that I would mention is the Ancestry Dna Learning Hub. And these two things are both mentioned on the handout that's attached to the Genealogy Plus webpage through the library. So the Ancestry Dna Learning Hub will answer your questions. They always have featured articles, which you can see some featured articles here, what to expect, and how does Ancestry Dna work. So that helps you understand what they're doing. So here's my contact information, kmjones@iastate.edu. So, and we can either take questions now or take questions later after Pete completes. And I will stop my share.
Kathy, this is Mo Wilkins, and I came on the Zoom meeting late, and I apologize for that. But I'm working on pulling my data into GEDmatch, and I'm still having difficulty doing that. Is there any way to make it work easier?
It's been a while since I did that. I just remember I had to create an export file within, in my case, my, oh, okay, I'm sorry, there's two things. There's GEDmatch is where you load your
Raw
the
DNA.
results. So I had to get those out of my Ancestry Dna account. And if you just type in help, how do I get my DNA to share, then it will tell you that. And they'll give you a file, and you just have to agree to certain conditions, because they're giving you something that they said they were going to keep us private. But I didn't have any trouble, so I don't really know what to tell you. I put myself and my mother-in-law and my husband all in there, and then they give you an identifier so you can see yourself once you're in the system. The other thing is it takes days, and so I'm thinking it was 3 or 4 days, because they have to reload the whole database in order for your matches to show up.
Right.
So I'm thinking it was 3 to 5 days for me to be able to see any GEDmatch results. So if you're in that period, that might be the problem.
Well, I've got my, I pulled my DNA and my brother's DNA because I controlled his info, and I brought those in, and then now I'm trying to determine of the 600 or 5,000, whatever I've got, who are maternal and who are paternal family. And that's the part I'm struggling with right now. I've also am in the process of contacting some close cousins and cousins' children to see if they won't download or upload their raw DNA and send it to me as a zip file. And then I can download it into my GEDmatch. And that might help me to split the male or the maternal and the paternal apart. So hopefully that'll help.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be much help on that. So you can contact me later and I'd be happy to look into some stuff.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
I haven't used GEDmatch that much. There was a specific person that asked me to load my stuff there, which is why I did it.
Got it.
And we had a small Centimorgan connection and he wanted to see if it was real. And it turned out it was real. And that we could find more information about our connection by going into GEDmatch.
Okay. And I've used through lines too, and it sometimes does help me to stay on the straight and narrow path, but sometimes it takes me down a rabbit den. So you can't always go by the through lines.
Exactly. That's why I mentioned the one case where it really took me off in a direction that didn't help. But
Right. So good information. Thank you.
Pete, I'm going to turn my sound off. So.
There we go. Am I on now?
You are. You should be good to go.
All right. Thank you, Megan. From the conversation that you just heard, you will notice that a lot of it depends on other people also doing their DNA. And so what you're going to find out is you're limited to people who have done that, and a little bit of information might come from other people that have put up family trees, but not actually done their DNA. Not everyone does that. Okay. All right. So what are we going to expect from this? Actually, what you're going to see is what Kathy talked about and what I talk about. There's some overlap here, but that's all right. I come at it from a little different direction. I'm strictly a user. I'm not into genetics. So you might find some information that I've run across that will be helpful if you're doing some searching. But other than that, I'm just a user of this. So the first thing I'm going to bring up here is why am I not getting a different screen? There we go. All right. DNA has a lot of different uses. And just to run through them kind of quickly, because Kathy mentioned some of these, it's identity, identification on living or dead people, adoptees you can find, and Kathy mentioned the prevention or the awareness of diseases and illnesses. Forensic science uses this a lot. It's used in criminal investigations. In fact, just in the last year or two, there was some DNA results that resulted in a arrest of a person in Cedar Rapids. So it is used. Also, as we're going to find out, ancestry and family history is available, a health report, agricultural uses of it for new breeds of grains, ancient mysteries, and mutations will be able to use DNA results. So we're going to find out what are the test results, what we find, and this little guy, R2D2, you can see this is kind of what we're going to find out, what we're made up of. And I think we're beyond toasters and camcorders, but it does suggest how we are made up. As Kathy mentioned, my background is basically Scandinavian. And the first test that I got back, I used Ancestry, not for any particular reason. It was available, and I picked it up and then used the information that they provided for that. But we have the ethnicity report that I got from that, and I was a little surprised because here, what, okay. I was surprised that I thought all my ancestors came from Sweden, all of them. Well, this shows I was only 54%, and this information now is about 5 years old. That was my first go at Ancestry when I got my DNA results. But as time goes on, they update their information. Whoop, I got to go back. This one was about a year ago. I got this information, and it shows now 91% from Sweden. Much more to my liking, because I was pretty sure that it should show that. Now you also notice that it shows with the different highlighted areas the where most likely people came from. So in a way, 81% Swedish, some Norwegian, and some Germanic European information, which a little surprised me. But as I did my work with this information, I did find a name that was Wilhelm. I thought Wilhelm doesn't sound too Swedish, so maybe there is a German connection there somewhere. I haven't taken that any further. Okay, Ancestry does then also provide information when you made your lines public or private. They did provide some history of that area when they find names that match up with that. So it's interesting to find out, what area they came from, what was going on at that time. And then as the dates get closer to this time frame, they'll add the people that you had in your lines that may have come from those areas and what was going on at that time. And keeps going, and even into the resettling of America, what was going on. And I know that, for instance, my grandmother, Ida Ritter, immigrated in 1890. And so this seems to fit pretty well. Now, who are your relatives? Ancestry doesn't tell you who my ancestors are, but with the help of the line of the chart I put out and the information they provide, you can confirm what you think you know. So, first of all, this definition, your direct line parents, grandparents, and beyond are your ancestors. That's where your DNA came from. Everybody else is a relative. This means aunts and uncles and cousins are all relatives of yours, not ancestors. Just a interesting chart here. You, in order to be born, you can see the list of how many people were involved, ancestors involved, for you to be here today. And just interesting to think about what might have happened over the last 400 years. You know, what difficulties did they have? You know, what did they go through? Where did they live? All of that information is interesting to think about. And in fact, a year ago, I did do a story on my grandmother with as much as I knew, so that information could be passed down to others that may be interested in my family. Now, this is I use Roots Magic. There are, of course, other ways to present your charts. I didn't use the circular chart that Kathy had. I used this, but it is a good way to provide information and to get a good look at where different people are located in your ancestry. Now, this would just strictly be ancestry. I have no cousins or anything listed on here. And this interesting guy depends on what you're looking for. You're not going to be able to be specific in finding wealthy relatives and going on from there. So if they win the lotto, you're out of luck. But you just keep looking. Now, cousins. Cousins are kind of interesting in the fact that a lot of people I call a cousin, or you may call it cousin, but where in fact they are first cousins, second cousins, and so on. That is a degree. A first cousin, a second cousin, those, if they say a second degree, third degree, and so on, but removal is going up the chart, maybe the children of a second cousin. They'd be a second cousin once removed. So you look at yourself, and there's your parents and your grandparents and so on, and then you have aunts and uncles, first cousins from those. The removals always refer to a different generation than you. So if it's children of a first cousin, they're always once removed. Or if they are a generation ahead of you, there could be a first cousin once removed going up or going down. But you always look for who is the common ancestor to get you to where your cousin might be. For instance, my grandparents, of course, had my father and mother, but they also had other children who were my aunts and uncles. And so children of my aunts and uncles from that union would be only first cousins. Their children would be my first cousins once removed. Interesting, I hadn't even thought about it, but from myself, my parents are deceased, my grandparents are deceased, all of my aunts and uncles are deceased, and my siblings are deceased. So I'm the only one on this chart at this time. I do have children though. Okay, now Kathy talked about the centimorgans and the did I miss a slide? No. Okay. We talked about centimorgans, and it is a way to share and to figure out where your lineage is. For instance, with cousins and that. You have yourself and your parents each supply centimorgans, and then as each generation goes up, you have less and less influence or centimorgans from those people, but they are still your ancestors, and these are still your cousins. Notice as it goes out to first, second, third, and fourth cousins, less and less of the centimorgans that the DNA can provide to find out whether you are actually related some way. Now, talking about cousins, how many cousins have you got? There's that centimorgan, and we've already talked about it. Now, I did a little wondering, it's been a while back, how many cousins do I think I have? Well, I started doing some calculating and some thinking about it, and got to make some assumptions here. But what we're going to find out is you got yourself, then you have two parents, one couple, grandparents, four of them, so on, great grands, and up. I just went as far as four great grandparents, of which you have 64. Now, here comes some decisions that I had to make. For instance, I decided that each of the grandparents, 32 couples, had an average of 5 kids. And that's back, if I took roughly back in the mid 1700s. So I don't know if that's a good or bad number. Families tended to have big families back then. So this is probably conservative maybe. But anyway, take out 16 of those because they become the next generation of grandparents. But that leaves 128 kids, you might say. Well, I take that row and I decided maybe that's an average of 4. And I kept doing that with each generation down. And I ended up with, in this, which I think is a conservative number, just under 100,000 cousins. In other words, first, second, third, fourth, fifth cousins that are laying out in the weeds somewhere. And I only know a few up to the second cousin. I don't know any beyond that. But it was just kind of an interesting exercise to determine maybe I've got a lot of cousins out there somewhere that I have no idea about. Okay, Ancestry, as Kathy talked about also, they provide information on different cousins. Now you can see this has a shared DNA of about 300 centimorgans across 14. And this person had a tree of 13 people. Well, I did click on that, and you can click on it when they give you that information. We're not live right now, so I can't show that. But they, as it turned out, I knew this person. Kind of surprised me. Been many, many years since I've seen that person. In fact, we were probably young kids. Was the last time we saw each other. And so it is a way to find who people are. I have not contacted that person. Stitches, the next one down, had quite a few more people, and it turns out she also is a second cousin of mine who I have emailed. We've emailed back and forth, and we know each other. And this person was kind of an interesting story. Also, she had a people 267 in her tree, and as we talked, we discovered that long ago we had family reunions, and when we were both quite young, we were at the same family reunion. Of course, we didn't know each other then very well, and we didn't know each other now, but she lives close to where I grew up. Well, as it happened, I attended a funeral of my brother here in the last few months, and she knew about it, and she came to the funeral also. So we actually were able to talk face to face, and she gave me then some information that I've been able to add to my tree. So you need to check out who some of these people are, and you don't know, for instance, who I do know this person, but I have no idea who this person is. So you just got to try them and see what they might know, and if there is a common thread there somewhere. There must be somewhere. It's just a matter of finding it. Now, they also go then to fourth, Ancestry does 4th through 6th. And this gets a little further away. You can see the DNA and the centimorgans are a lot less. And that's how they determined probably in the 4th through 6th area or cousin of yours. Now, I did, let's see if I got another one here. Yeah, here's 5th through 8th. Now that gets out, and you see the centimorgans are quite a bit smaller. And so you might be related, but it's going to be harder to find your common ancestor. And in fact, I don't think on this page, but I did reach out to a 5th cousin. And as it turned out, this cousin lives in Sweden. And but we could not find a a common ancestor between the two of us. So there probably is, we just haven't found it yet. Now, Ancestry does provide, as Kathy also showed, pictures of some of the people that they have in there, if they put in there. So good information to see who you might be talking to. Also, then here is my chart again of what I've got, and that leads to then, I'm going to go back. There's a Daniel, my great grandfather would be Daniel Jacobson, and his wife Helena Sophia. And then Ancestry provides hints once in a while. And they provided a hint that said they had some information about a photo that someone else had put on about Daniel Jacobson. And then I can look at several other things, a marriage record and a death record of that, which I found interesting because I didn't have that photo. So it was good that somebody else had put that on. Well, then I clicked on that information, and here was Daniel Jacobson, a male, and his age and so on, and his spouse. So I was pretty sure that this was the correct person that I was looking at. The age and death dates were the right, and so you can click on, is this okay? Then they show you where you can find information on people called Daniel Jacobson. Now I say that because you can go down here and also find other people who are searching for Daniel Jacobson. Now you got to remember that's the name Daniel Jacobson, not necessarily the one that you're looking at. And in a way, I did look at that, and the first item that came up was from a family tree of the name Satur, but I looked at the father's name, the mother's name, and the spouse's name, and the information that they had about Daniel Jacobson, and I found all that is true. So I clicked on this. Well, first of all, then on, oops, I gotta go back. There's another Daniel Jacobson, but the information isn't correct. So all Ancestry can do is provide you with the name, and then it's up to you to decide what you're looking at. But I did go to this Satur family tree to see what information that they had put in. And because I'm familiar with the name Satur from the area where I grew up. So here was her public tree, or their public tree that they put on. And you can see out here names of some of the people. And here is Daniel Jacobson and Lena, or Helena. Johnson was her maiden name. But so I'm confident these are the correct people. Then their children, one of them was John Fritz Jacobson, which is from the Satur. And as it turned out, that's a brother of my grandfather. And then it goes down to their children, or one of their children. And lo and behold, I knew this lady, and I knew her husband. So all this seems to be a good fit. And I contacted the Satur family tree, you can do that on there with an email. And we have touched base and found good information. So if you're stuck on something and you've just got to stay with it with Ancestry, and they'll provide a lot of information, but it's up to you then to work on it and to take what they give you and to go forward. So that's the information I have. If there are questions, I try to answer them.
Great. Thank you, Pete and Kathy. If folks have questions, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask, or throw it into the chat, and I'd be happy to make sure it gets answered.
Pete, where did you find those cousin charts and the Senna Morgan chart?
Oh, I went on Google and just type in cousin chart or Santa Morgan chart, and you'll get quite a bit of information just from Googling.
Okay, thank you.
How secure do you feel with Ancestry.com? I recently tried a trial, 2-week free trial, and I couldn't get out of it. So I'm afraid I could have additional charges coming up. I mean, I'm kind of concerned. Have you heard of anything like that way?
No. Did you send in your DNA and it's from that?
No, I did not. I did some family tree work. And then recently I sent my father's DNA in. So.
I don't know what they might do there. I'd be kind of surprised unless you subscribe to Ancestry, whether they would charge you anything.
Okay. Yeah. And the other question I have real quickly is, talking to one of my first cousins, she mentioned that my grandmother had mentioned we were related to a name from the Mayflower. So the both of us have been doing a lot of research on this, and we've made connections that way. And we found there's a society, which I don't think either of us have put into yet. But I'm just wondering about the privacy of our information. So she did get hers confirmed. So it was confirmed through my cousin.
That's a great confirmation to have that. But whether generally sites like that have a way to say whether you want to keep it private or whether put it out for others to look at. So I've not looked into that, so I can't for sure answer that, but do look for a private or a public click on that.
Okay, because I think when I did research, I found a lot of clicks, and then people would say, how did you get this information? Or, I mean, they were surprised it had been put out. I found it by, just through going down the rabbit holes like you were showing.
Maybe another member of our group that's listening in knows a better answer than I've got.
Okay, thank you.
There is a question. Sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to follow up on that. My son-in-law is an Alden descendant. Would that happen to be your family?
No. Okay.
Yeah, his was Alden and Mullins. We're both on the Mayflower.
So we've got a question in the chat asking about other good software to keep track of genealogical tree information besides Ancestry.
You can look at, I'm going to stop sharing here.
Sure.
You can look at other sites like 23andMe, GRI Genetics. There's quite a few out there. You can, go on Google again and look at DNA sites that you can work with. And there's also other trees that you can put. I just happen to use Roots Magic, but there are also a lot of trees that others I know are using.
Megan,
Yeah, hi Dick.
your question, I think, was, or the person's question was, are there other software programs you can use for genealogical information? Is that correct?
That seems to be what the question is. Yep.
To me, the first question you have to ask yourself is, do I want to make the names and other information about my ancestors public or private, and on somebody else's computer, for instance, Ancestry or Family Search or whatever it might be? Or do I want to keep all that information on my own computer where I have complete 100% control over it? And that's what I think the first question you have to ask yourself is. And I chose, as Pete did, I chose Roots Magic, and I haven't been sorry I chose it. I can't use the through lines because I don't have a tree on Ancestry, but I find there's a lot of other things I can do with my genealogy.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that that's a good point, especially given how much of this conversation has been about privacy and privacy of information. If you're
Yes.
doing something on the web, it's probably going to be inherently less private than something that's saved directly on your personal computer.
Very well put.
Any other questions out there for our presenters?
I have a quick question. I know this is focused more on the kind of the genealogical tree and how you can use DNA for that. Have any of you had experience with looking at medical history and looking at your genealogical tree? Things like hemophilia or other traits that could be passed along that way?
No, I haven't. And here again, it depends on the DNA testing site that you are going to use. I'm not sure Ancestry does that very well or at all. 23andMe or the CRI Genetics, I think, would be a better choice, I believe, to get that. But I don't have any experience, and I don't know anybody that has had that experience.
Personally, I'm more inclined to not use DNA for health purposes. And this is me speaking. With all I know of instances where doctors have known before birth of defects within a baby before birth, and act accordingly when birth takes place. I've heard of this, and I know of this so many places and times that I think using DNA for that purpose is not really the right thing. I'm sorry.
All right, do we have any other questions for presenters?
Kathy mentioned that there was a site that you could go to look at the PowerPoint presentations or to get the information that the presenters gave. Can you provide that website?
So I will put the link to the handout for the presentation in the chat. I believe that's what Kathy was referring to. Yeah. She's nodding. So the link to that is in the chat, as well as I will link to the Ames Public Library's Genealogy Plus page on our website, which contains handouts from our past presentations as well.
This is my first time of joining, so I appreciate kind of hand holding me here.
No problem. And if you are interested, those past presentations are also available as recordings on the Ames Public Library YouTube channel.
Okay, thank you.
Catch those there.
Thank you.
All right. If we don't have any other questions from today's presentation, we'll go ahead and say thank you to Pete and Kathy. And we will see you all next month on February 17th.
Thank you, Kathy and Pete.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Yep,
Good
thanks.
information.